I'm going to be presenting compressed sensing. I'll try and keep it brief, but we'll see. So I actually want a few things from the audience, if I'm honest. So one thing you notice in academic talks, and this is really for the people who haven't been to many academic talks, there are some people who go on stage and they try and present things in a way that makes them seem clever and nobody understands it. I'm not trying to do that. So in particular, the talks on maths, that's pretty difficult to present in general. It's a topic where you want to be talking about objects that have been defined throughout an undergraduate in maths, and it's very difficult to do that. So I need your help. What I want is for people to be asking questions. Like, I'm perfectly happy for this to be a fairly informal discussion. I'm sure there are mistakes, possibly. You know, there might be things that aren't very clear. Please just ask. Like, you know, there are people in the room with completely different backgrounds in maths, and some parts of this talk might be, the idea is that everyone gets something from it, and if I don't want that to, you know, not happen because someone is worried about asking a question, so please ask. And the same thing if I'm going too slowly or quickly, you know, this part aside, like, yeah, please do let me know about if the pace is wrong. Okay, so there's a reason I want this talk to be good, actually. And Jack and Janusz have let me use these pictures, for one thing. They suggested them, not me. And secondly, they actually promised me a Windex if my talk is good. So I have an added incentive. And with that in mind, I've actually prepared some lines for you to say to them at the end of the talk. Wow, that talk was great. Alex is a very handsome, modest man and deserves a Windex. This talk has changed my view of the world. I'm going to change my master's PhD program and revise my dreams and ambitions. Give this man all the Windeces he wants and vote for him for president. They're just suggestions for things you could say to them, but, you know, highly encouraged. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with a test for you guys on simultaneous equations. I'll discuss how MRI scanners work. Roughly, I'm going to skim lots of details throughout this. I'm going to discuss compression, specifically compression of images, but I'll talk about how you might go about compressing words. I'll talk about compressed sensing, which is good because that was the title. And I'll talk about what some of the open problems in the field and how, you know, the challenges I've had during my PhD. So I'm really sorry that I mentioned the word test. Like, I just found this sad picture of a student. So I've actually added a suggested comment if you really don't like the talk. The speaker's annoying. He told us that the talk would be accessible, and then he began by setting us a test. The talk itself had a mistake in 2 slides' time, and Alex kept yapping on about being edgy or something. He should still get a Windex. Okay, so here's the test, but I'm actually going to go through it with you. So I want you to think about the following problem. So we have a giant and a sandwich, and they're having an election to decide who gets to cause a nuclear war. And if you don't know why it's a giant or a sandwich, you need to watch more TV. There's going to be 51 votes shared between the giant and the sandwich. And the giant will get 1 more vote than the sandwich. How many votes did the giant get? So 51 votes shared between the giant and the sandwich. The giant gets 1 more vote than the sandwich. How many votes does the giant get? So you can phrase this as 2 simultaneous equations. G plus S, which is the giant's plus the sandwich's votes, is 51. And the giant gets 1 more than the sandwich, so G minus S is 1. And then you can sum the 2 equations together and divide by 2, and then the sandwich will get 26 votes. That's the mistake, by the way. It's the giant. You've all failed the test. Go to Oxford or something. Okay, anyway, it's simple simultaneous equations. You've probably all seen this at school. But the point here is that we had 2 items of data. We got told G plus S and we got told G minus S. And we were asked to recover 2 pieces of information. So there's a match there. We had 2 pieces to start with, and we ended up with 2 pieces of valuable information. So I'm going to give a different problem now. A giant and a sandwich are having an election to decide whether or not to Brexit, as giants and sandwiches frequently do. There's going to be 51 votes shared between the pork-loving giant and the sandwich. How many votes did the giant get? Well, can we actually tell? So all we know is G plus S is 51. can we even tell what G is? The answer is no. You could set G equals 26 and the number of votes for the sandwich is 25. Or it could be that G is 0 and the giant doesn't get any votes and the sandwich gets 51. And so on. And actually there's an infinite number of these possibilities, provided we accept negative integers. But there's an idea here, right? So we had 2 pieces of information we wanted to recover. If we have less than 2 pieces of data, we're not going to be able to do it. And that generalizes. This is a fundamental result in linear algebra. If you have n pieces of information you want to recover, you need n pieces of data. And if you see n minus 1 bits of data, or possibly fewer, there are infinitely many possibilities for what the data could actually be representing. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you what an image is now. An image is a grid of pixels. So you have this grid, so a square or a rectangle, and it will be various mathematical values inserted in the grid. And then your computer will work out how to represent that. So I'm just going to say, as our simple representation here, each pixel is going to be given a value between 0 and 1. 1 is going to correspond to white, 0 is going to correspond to black. Now that has not come out right. I don't know why it's done that. That is meant to be a grid of 4 pixels. The top left corner is meant to be grey. Those 2 are black, hence 0. And that bottom left is white, hence 1. Okay, so what happens when you use an MRI scanner? Well, the MRI scanner itself doesn't see the image. It sees some transformation of the image. And that's kind of the key problem here. So instead of seeing G and S as our giant and sandwich example, we might see some versions of G and S, like G plus S and G minus S, except there's going to be a grid of maybe 1 million of these equations. And it's going to take these this n times n bit of data and transform it back to get the original image. That transformation process is actually very quick. Okay, that's not good. Did you guys put the old version up, or?
I didn't put up.
Never mind. Okay, never mind. That was meant to be a vision of what the MRI scanner sees, but I guess I can't show you. Yeah, the point here is that we're going to need n times n bits of data in order to recover the original image. And if we had fewer, we're not going to be able to do it. There's going to be infinite possibilities for the original image. Now, the problem isn't transforming back. The problem is actually obtaining that data in the first place. So obtaining that data can take a very long time. And the MRI scanner, the reason it takes so long is essentially that. And this applies in other fields. So the oil industry, I think, might use this because they need to essentially locate oil. And that requires a lot of data, and data collection is expensive. There can be other reasons, like I think fluorescence microscopy uses this. I think there's some theorems in astronomy when you're taking images where you might want to use this. Okay, so it's not obvious that you can take fewer samples and get anything sensible, but that's exactly the purpose of compressed sensing, and that's essentially what I'm working on. Okay, so I'm going to start by compressing a sentence to show you how compression works. We'll generalize this to images, and then I'll talk about how compressed sensing works. So a very basic sentence: the cat sat on the bat, meouch. I apologise. So what we could do is we could do like with the image, where each pixel, we have a grid of information and each pixel is represented by a number. We could do this with each character of the sentence. So T could represent something, H could represent something, E can represent something, and so on. So when you do this with ASCII, which is the standard way of doing this, you end up with that information to represent the cat sat on the bat, meouch. I didn't calculate this by hand. Yeah. It's a long piece of information. There's a lot there for one simple sentence, and it almost feels redundant. But the truth is, if you wanted to represent any kind of configuration of letters, then this is what you would need to do. You would need to represent every single letter individually as a number. So here, 84 would represent a T. That's the first. I'm not going to read the entire number out. I'll be there for quite a while. But 84 is going to represent a T. 104 is going to represent H, and so So we would need to store 32 different numbers in order to store this very simple sentence. And if you imagine, I mean, 32 for a computer is absolutely nothing, but if you imagine you had lots and lots of books, for example, on your computer, or something like that, perhaps this suddenly grows very quickly. And if you think about images, for example, you know, if you had to store every single thing individually, you wouldn't be able to store many images. So what we want to notice about this data we're being fed, or this information that we're being fed, the cat sat on the back meowch, is that everything is a word. I mean, meowch is meaningless, but it's still words. And we should be able to exploit that somehow. So the problem with storing every character is that we're permitting any configuration of characters. And here we want to, you know, we want to take advantage of the fact that there's more structure to what we're doing. So we could form a dictionary. We could let 1 be the word the, 2 be the word cat, 3 sat, so on. I'm not going to read it all out. You can read it. And then we could store, you know, our sentence much more simply. So it would just be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 5, 6, 7. And the advantage is maybe not so pronounced here because somewhere you have to store the dictionary, right, in the computer. But the point is, imagine if I wrote that sentence out 1 million times. If I stored it with characters, I would need 32 million. Here I would need 8 million, and I might even be able to simplify it by building a dictionary of the sentence and just repeating that. The point here is we've taken advantage of some common thing. Okay, at this point I've done about half the talk, so does anyone have any questions? Is that all clear? Wow, that's surprising.
What is the data format you get out of an MRI? Is that coming later? Or?
So it's the Fourier transform of the image.
So it's just the frequency?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a 2D Fourier transform. I think it's the infinite version, but the way that you treat things in compressed sensing is with the discretized version. It's wrong, and I know it's wrong, but correcting for it is a bit complicated, and lots of people, there's other problems in our field at the moment than that one.
What if you're searching for words using this and there's a typo, and then you've got like just a number for a word, but it's, or is that not what it's supposed to be?
Well, if you ran your compression algorithm on those sentences, for example, it would look in the dictionary for words to match things against.
But but then if there's a typo and it's only got, say it's got number 1 for the, and you spell the PHA, would it then still manage to find number 1?
Well, it would fail, wouldn't it? Because it wouldn't match the word. So, you know, there's different ways you could handle that. You could build a new compression out. You could, for example, say, I think there might be a typo here, or you could do some kind of escape sequence where you tell the computer you're going to go back to ASCII for a short period of time. There's lots of ways you could handle it and still preserve the advantages of compression. The point is that on average, things are words. And you can deal with the other things just in the standard way. You're looking for kind of average patterns in data. What you could do is you could compress it to the, because that's the closest match, and that would really be compression. Because here what we've really done, we're doing lossless compression, really. We haven't lost any information by doing this compression. But it would be perfectly possible to do lossy compression where you just find the closest match. That might not work well with some books because, you know, some words are going to end up reading. I mean, in some books' cases, it won't make any difference. The book's still rubbish, but, you know, for good authors, they might get a bit pissed off if you've kind of messed this up. Yeah, it's something you could deal with. Any other questions?
Yeah. How do you tie back the idea about having not enough information to describe a system? You said that if you were missing one piece of information, then there'd be an infinitely many ways to describe that system. But if we lost one word, then I can imagine you'd be able to recover that a lot easier.
Well, so what do you mean by recover it? So imagine we lost, you know, we lost the word sat from this sentence. Right.
Use the word the.
So that's kind of what compressed sensing does. It's an intelligent way of trying to recover data. So in that case, you'd be talking about something like machine learning, really, wouldn't you? You know, you'd be trying to teach the computer, you know, it reads the words the cat. What's the next word? Probably sat. You know. But it's not really what I'm going to discuss today, if I'm honest.
So Fourier transforms. Don't look at me like that.
No, sorry, I'm squinting.
Fourier transforms aren't really that expensive, right? They're n log n. So
Indeed.
Is it just that you have to collect lots and lots of data?
Absolutely, yeah. So you can invert the discrete Fourier transform. Inverse is basically the discrete Fourier transform. Yes. So you're right. It's a very quick operation, and actually, the speed of the operation being quick is critical to why compressed sensing can work. I can't really go into exactly why, but essentially you have to do a lot of matrix vector products in order for everything to work. This also means the way you compress things has to be quick as well. And luckily, through some fluke, or I guess the way it's designed, the compression methods we use are very quick. They're actually ON rather than ON log n. Okay, anyone else? No, cool, let's carry on then. So we could, yeah, I've said this already. If we expanded the dictionary to include lots of different words, we could store any book. And then we could store lots and lots of books. You know, we pay a penalty to store the dictionary initially. Somewhere in the computer you have to have stored a file with all the words. But if you had lots and lots of books to store, you would mitigate that penalty. And it's the same kind of thing with images. In actual fact, you don't have to store the dictionary with images, but you know, the idea is still there that you gain an advantage because you're doing lots and lots of images. So the common pattern here is words. And yeah, that's what we're using to compress things. So now I'm going to show you why images have a similar phenomenon going on. There we go. So these are two random images I took. Now the point here is if I take images which are useful in the real world, they look very different to these. And what I'm really saying here is that the collection of images is massively broad. If you say, okay, you can represent any image, you know, you put numbers in any box, what would you get on average? You're going to get something that looks like this, and that's not going to be close to the real world images. So in other words, what I'm saying is that there must be some difference between the real world images and your average image that you take at random. Okay, that was a bit complicated. Everyone good? Okay. So what distinguishes them from real world images? So I took 3 world images here. And actually, what I'm going to show is that even though these images look very different, we've got a handsome man in one of them, a complete in another one, and a picture that I can't remember why I took that or what it is. You decide which order that is, by the way. So what I'm going to talk about here is edges. And the way I'm going to talk about an edge is if you have 2 pixels and they have a very different gap, if you think about it, that gives you an edge. If they're very close in value, then you don't have an edge there. But if they're very different, then there's going to be some kind of edge. So maybe, you know, if I drew a stick man in a field and I coloured the rest white and the tree is black, you're going to see the edge where it changes from white to black. Okay, and the point here is that if you take a real world image, it has far fewer edges than a random one. And that seems a little surprising at first because you looked at those images earlier and you're thinking, wow, there's lots of edges. But I will demonstrate this. I'm going to show you 4 images, I think. And I'm going to show their edges and what percentage of the total pixels are made up of edges. And just as a reference point, if I do the same experiment with the random images, the answer is 99%. With those 2 random images, I mean, I could eventually, if I searched all random images, I'd find these real world images as well. But the point is, if I just take 2 images at random with high probability, it's going to be a massive number. Okay, so first image is that picture on the wall. And you can see the edge graph on the side. That's just a plot of where the edges are. And that worked out to be 6.2% of the total pixels. Yes?
So when you have an edge, it's because there's more, like a big difference in between the 2 pixels.
Yeah.
I'm guessing my question is, what percentage of difference does it take for it to be an edge?
That's a very good question. In actual fact, I'm cheating a little bit. Like, this is not really a good way to, you know, there are better ways of finding edges than what I've done naively here. This took me 5 minutes in MATLAB. And I essentially chose values until I got reasonable edges. I chose consistent values between all the images. Yes?
What technique are you using to detect edges?
What?
What technique?
Oh, I literally just put a white pixel if there was a difference between it and any neighbouring pixels.
Okay.
And the difference I set was 10 over 255, I think. So I don't know what percentage that is. I can't work that out. All right, but the point is this took 6.2% of the pixels were calculated as an edge here. And I can do the same with this one. It doesn't pick up on my face. You know, this is exactly the point you were making. It's a kind of tolerance parameter there. You know, how likely are you to assign something as an edge? And I tried with various numbers, and this was the best I could get to see edges. But you certainly pick up the glass with the lemon dumped in it for no reason at all. And you end up with 3.8% of the pixels are edges. We can do the same with the future US president. And yeah, you can see that there's an edge map here. So I told you this picture was relevant. And that gives you 7.5% of the edges. And we can even take a semi-naked pirate. And we can calculate, again, an edge map. And it comes out to be 1.4%. It doesn't really pick up on my fantastic body there.
It's picking up noise. Right?
Yes, it is. So of course, something like this will pick up noise. It actually means you can use the compression techniques we're using to denoise things. You know, because you will lose the edges when you're doing this, and that is one way you can denoise. It's called wavelet denoising. The reason this has happened is because this was taken on a drunk night, and whoever had the camera obviously couldn't handle my body and decided to put noise everywhere. So yeah, it's not a fantastic image for demonstrating that, but the point is it's a real world image and it has the same property. And even though those images are all totally different, they have that property of having limited number of edges. Okay, so this is a technical slide about wavelets. So don't worry if you get lost on this slide because you'll follow me on the next one. What you basically are doing, there's this field of maths called harmonic analysis. And the idea is to break up some kind of function into lots of other functions. So Fourier series, for example, are an example of this. And we use something called wavelets. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly how they're constructed because that could be, you know, a substantial talk on its own. But the point is they have functions that when you integrate them, they come out to be 0. And the length of the function, which is non-zero, shrinks. So if you imagine, it could be plus or minus 1 on an interval, and then that interval shrinks as you go further down the wavelet decomposition. And the point then is, if you're constant, if you integrate against that function, so you multiply your image by that function, if it's constant on an area, because that gap shrinks, it will eventually be constant across the whole of the wavelet. So we'll be multiplying a function that integrates to 0 by a constant, and that's going to evaluate to 0. Phew. Anyone understand any of that? Yeah, I can show people in more detail later if they're interested, but...
The wavelet coefficient will be 0.
Yes, so the wavelet coefficient is how many of that function you're taking in. Like a Fourier coefficient is how much of sine and cosine there is in that function. Any other questions? I'm happy to take questions on this.
Which wavelets?
Well, it won't matter so long as they have compact support, because they're still going to integrate to 0. It's one of the properties. So you can construct wavelets without compact support, and I have no idea what that would do to something like this. I haven't really thought about it. I tend to use Dobberstein wavelets, which are really, no way am I defining those, but the really simple one to think about is Haar wavelets, which is just -1 and then +1, and then that shrinks. Any other questions? No? Okay. Don't worry if you didn't follow any of that. The point is that you can compress your images. And I took a picture from a few years ago. That has shown up very nicely. But it's actually fairly representative. So you can see it's just a picture of me, and I compressed it. And what I did to compress it is I forgot all the data which was close to 0 and only memorized the bit that wasn't close to 0. And if you look at the wavelet coefficients, it's very difficult to see. But right up there in the top left, there's a little bit of white. Can anyone see that? Yeah, so some of the people at the front are nodding. And that is essentially where all the information about the image is stored, because there are so few edges. If I did the same experiment with the random image I generated, I would not get a result like this. I wouldn't get the decay. But the point here is that I only have to remember that top left bit of the image in order to basically understand the entire image. Everything else is roughly 0 anyway, so it doesn't count for anything. So here I took 1% of the values you would normally take if you were using pixels. So that's, you know, a 100-fold compression ratio.
Can you just explain a little bit about why that white corner is going to help you recover the image? What if the white corner was the other side of the image?
So it won't be, because this white corner is the wavelets with the largest support. So the length of the wavelet goes down as you get closer to this side. And the point of it going down is that then it gets into a region where the pixels don't vary much. And because the pixels aren't going to vary much, it will integrate to 0, and you get 0 as the wavelet coefficient.
So that wavelet box it's not pixel by pixel corresponding to the original image.
It is each wavelet coefficient at that.
At that.
Yeah.
So the same corresponding.
Well, so it's not directly corresponding to the pixels. It's divided into levels. It's quite a complicated topic how wavelets work. But essentially, these are the wavelet coefficients which have the largest support. So they take up the whole image, and then when you integrate them over across the whole image, it's obviously not going to be 0 because the image has got edges. But then when you get to these areas here, the support is tiny. You integrate it against the image, it vanishes.
Why are they compressed to that region of the image?
That is why these wavelet coefficients correspond to the wavelets with the smallest support,
All right.
the largest support rather. And the ones in the bottom right are the smallest support, so they vanish when you integrate them.
I find it not very intuitive because isn't there like an obvious edge on Churchill's face and your shirt?
Yeah, but it's not. Again, it's not.
corresponding.
Yeah, it's not corresponding pixel by pixel.
Okay.
Basically, this is really difficult to understand unless I showed you what a wavelet looks
So
like.
that wavelet coefficient box is like, it's not like you can't overlay it on your pictures. It's just representing the different wavelets, and you're cutting out the bottom corner to use
Yes.
for the next.
So if you just took these wavelets here, they would be the ones with really, really small support. And then the point is that even if there is an edge, most of those coefficients are not going to be on top of that edge. They're going to be, if the support is really tiny, they might take up that little area there, but then the image is roughly constant on that little area. It is difficult to understand, so don't worry too much about it.
Maybe you should say that you have a square in the middle because that's just how you choose to order the wavelet coefficients.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So there are other ways of ordering the wavelet coefficients, and that would give you a different region where it's,
No, the thing is that the wavelets with the small support, they will still capture the edge, but
Some of them will.
because there's a translation thing.
Right,
Only
yeah.
the ones that are exactly on top of the
Yes,
edge.
and that becomes
And
smaller
all the other ones
proportion.
will be 0.
Yes. So that becomes a smaller and smaller proportion. It becomes harder and harder to see. That's essentially what's going on. It's like I said, this is particularly if you don't know a lot of maths, this is really difficult for me to explain easily. I would have to show you pictures of wavelets, but they're even more complicated because in 2 dimensions there's lots of different ways of constructing them. In 1 dimension it's pretty easy. You've just got +1, -1, but then after that it becomes harder.
Is it then the less wavelets you choose, the less detailed your compressed image is going to be in the end?
Indeed, yeah. Most of them are not going to be exactly 0. They just look so close to 0 you can't distinguish it, particularly with this screen. And that's kind of the point. We just scrap them. That's why this is a lossy compression, by the way. We're going to lose a bit of data on the pixels which are on the wavelet coefficients which are only close to 0. We'll just forget them and say they're 0. Okay. I hope that made some sense to some people. I promised to explain one of the reasons websites load so quickly. I mean, that is part of the reason. If you can compress the images, you need to send less data across the network. If you couldn't compress them, then, when you're browsing the internet late at night, it would take a lot longer to do what you want to do.
Since when has this been around? Since when do people use that sort of...
I've no idea why you're laughing. This is since about 1990, I think, this kind of compression is invented. But people have done other compressions using different things other than wavelets. And basically, it's the way you want to compress things depends on the data you have. So if you know your image is going to have few edges, this is a pretty good way of doing it. But there are other kinds of images, which have different compression. Sound files, this wouldn't work for. You need something completely different for sound files. Words, for example, there's no really wavelet structure. So wavelets have been around since the 90s.
They've been in internet format since JPEG 2000.
Indeed, yes. So actually, this isn't what most people are doing with compression, but it works very well with compressed sensing. JPEG 2000 is the standard that uses wavelets. For some reason, it wasn't adopted. I don't really know why.
You don't need it.
Right. Okay.
JPEG works close enough. JPEG 2000 is a lot better, but.
Okay.
Isn't it encumbered by patents as well?
Yeah, that probably wouldn't help. The point is, for compressed sensing, we will need wavelets. So we basically, I really only think about compression with wavelets. Okay, so with the MRI scanner, going back to that example, we have, it's going to take an n by n pixel image, and it's going to give you lots and lots of frequencies, and we want to take as little of those as possible and still recover the image. So how do we, like I said earlier, there's going to be lots of different images that could match that data. The whole point here is that most of them are going to have lots and lots of edges. How do we find the right image? So that's this problem here. If we take less than n by n samples, multiple images will match those samples. How do we know which one is right? And the answer is, we look for the one that's the most compressible. And that's a simple thing to do. If you imagine that your random images are not going to be very compressible, they're unlikely to, be the right answer when you do that. That in itself is a complicated process, but at least that gives you an idea of how it's done.
Do you arrive at a single most, or do you get a subset of a subset until you...
It's a very complicated question you're asking. And will the algorithm get to the right point? Will it take in enough data to get the right, is the right point even attainable if the algorithm worked perfectly? Very difficult questions. And you can come up with examples where it will fail. If you...
It depends where you set your wavelet threshold, right?
Well, you're not setting any threshold. You're just sampling like this. You sample certain frequencies of the MRI scanner. And the question then is, do those frequencies give you enough information to be able to capture the image you need? And that's a difficult question. So this is an example of compressed sensing. Now, I've taken this image as a picture of someone's brain, but it's probably from Oxford if it came from someone's brain. This is called the Shep-Logan phantom, and it's very commonly used as a kind of demonstration of this thing. It is obviously nonsense, but the ideas all still work, and I think, hopefully, in a couple of slides I have another image which demonstrates the same principle. Yes?
You said your original set of data is like a Fourier spectrum.
Right.
So that's essentially the basis is sinusoids.
Yeah.
How do you convert that to the wavelets?
So what you look for is an image which, when you take its wavelet coefficients, it's small in some norm. And the norm you actually try and minimize the L1 norm.
But then you have to convert it to...
And then you convert it back that will give you an answer of wavelet coefficients.
Spectrum, you convert it to...
So you look for images that match the data, but you're looking for the one that has the least wavelet coefficients, if that makes sense. Okay.
But the question is, can you do that directly from the Fourier spectrum?
No, it's not. I suspect not, because it's not invertible. Nothing's invertible.
You have to do this.
You have to do this extra processing. Yes.
So this is frequency domain. You've not literally taken the middle bit of the image, right?
No. So sorry, I should say these are the Fourier coefficients in the frequency domain, in the middle of the frequency domain. So if that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry about it. The point is that I'm taking only 20% of the MRI coefficients and still getting the right answer. And actually, you can do a lot better than that. This is probably a low resolution image I used when I did this years ago. So of course, everything I've talked about is an MRI scanner so far, and that's not really what compressed sensing is about. It's about any scanning device, and the idea is to minimize the number of samples you take by looking for a way to compress it. So yeah, you're really looking for sampling devices where it takes a lot of money or it takes a lot of time. There are, I think people have done it with CT scanners, which as far as I know, inject radiation in the patient. So it's obviously best to get them out of there as quickly as possible. Something like this would help with that. So here's the general theme behind everything. You start with some kind of scanning device that takes a long time or costs a lot, or for some reason you don't want to be using for a very long time. And then you find a common pattern to the data that you're trying to recover. So in the case of images, it's that the wavelet coefficients are small, that the image is compressible. And then you want to reduce the amount of data you take in by looking for the most compressible object that matches your data. Okay, has everyone followed all of that so far? Now I'm just going to talk very briefly about the open problems. I know Casey wants to get to his Champions League match. Okay, so it's natural to ask, why did I take those frequencies in the center? Why couldn't I have just taken them everywhere? And it's completely, that's annoying, I don't have the picture. It's completely dependent on where you take the samples. It's absolutely dependent on where you take the samples. And understanding that relation between which samples you need to be taking and the answers you're trying to get, the scanning device, is really hard. So these are some questions I've thought about when I'm doing my PhD. I've thought, which frequencies do we need to be able to scan at in order to recover data that we might want, or images that we might want? And that is insanely hard. So what people do is they say, take your frequencies you scan at random, but with some kind of weight to the randomness. So try and push them towards the center, but take them at random. And then you can say, on average, things work. And that's basically the best we've got in the field at the moment. We can only say, on average, things work. In general, in maths, it's much easier to prove things work on average than proving they work all the time. And that's why people have done this. It's not a natural thing to do, and ideally we want a result which says if you take these frequencies, you get these images back, and exactly these images back. But nobody can do that. That's so difficult. So yeah, I have a paper on that first topic which introduces a condition on the scanning device, and if the scanning device has that condition and your samples make it have that condition, you'll be good and you'll be able to recover everything. The problem is it's very difficult to verify that condition to the point where it's NP hard on a computer, and yeah, you know, I've got a few examples where it happens, but it's generally quite difficult. Another question is, what's the best way of compressing images? Like maybe edges isn't the best thing to do. So some people do total variation, which is the amount of variation between every pixel. Some people use different structures than wavelets. You can use JPEG, for example, rather than JPEG 2000. So JPEG 2000 would be using wavelets. JPEG would be using cosines, and you get different results if you do that. How about the algorithms themselves? So I didn't really talk about this, but how do you look for the most compressible image? So it turns out you can solve these things as a linear programming problem, but that also requires you to know exactly how the scanning device is structured, and that is very difficult. So people have come up with algorithms. Sometimes they work, sometimes they fail. Sometimes they don't work on a problem they should work on, and it's still, that's currently what I'm working on. It's very difficult to say exactly when it's going to work. Okay, and that's about all I have to say about this.